Every time I ask my guests, so what does success mean to you? I do get a slightly different answer. I would say happiness comes quite high in the list. Happiness, and then, so how do you measure that happiness? What is that happiness index for you? And that's really related to having the freedom to do what you want to do is one aspect of that. Having the confidence in yourself to know that you've got everything inside you that you need to be able to live the life that you want. And we all do. We just put these barriers up that actually stop us from achieving what we want to achieve.
Welcome to the Super Clinic Project Podcast, where we take regular clinic owners and turn them into cash-based multimillionaire entrepreneurs. Warning, if you're a doctor who listens to this podcast regularly, you will make millions of dollars. Do not listen to this podcast unless you want to be a successful clinic owner who helps thousands of patients achieve their health goals and adds more money than you can imagine to your bank account. You've been warned.
Welcome to the Super Clinic Project Podcast, where we take regular clinic owners and turn them into super clinic owners. I'm one of your hosts, Jennifer Gligoric, and today it's just me, but I've got a very exciting guest that I know that you're absolutely going to love. He's a top sales coach with Verizon Corporate out of the UK for over 30 years. He's also the host of the very popular Success Matters podcast, where the format is very simple, but also very deep. He asks everyday people what success means to them. He's worked with small to very large businesses around the globe, including closing very highly complex business-to-business high-ticket sales. He's run his own business. He's an advisor, mentor, and ambassador to a number of startups, including the Blue Bike Foundation. And we're just excited to have this great conversation with him today. Please welcome Sanjai Mehta of Success Matters podcast to the show today.
Hey, Jennifer. I'm very well, thank you. And thank you for that great introduction. I hope I can live up to that introduction and, give some insights and pearls of wisdom to your listeners as well.
Yes. Well, now it is, now the pressure is on. we got to do it. So I was very interested that someone who had been in such sales, and you have, at the sales level that you're on, it is very high pressure, there's a lot of moving parts. You're dealing with, a lot of things that can go wrong in that. And, our listeners are mostly clinic owners in healthcare. So they have the same thing. There's a high pressure because it's people's lives and getting them back on track. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that before we go into, the deeper thing about success and how we can help our clinic owners stay focused on what really matters to them. One of the things that we struggle with our owners is having to close a sale when they don't feel like salespeople. And you've coached a lot of people through this. So can you give me any tips for people who are very heart-centered? They want to help, but at the same time, if they don't help them, these people are going to go and their health will suffer. Their income will suffer. And how can we help them turn their mindset around to where they can really do what they've been put on the planet to do, which is heal?
Yeah, that's the $64 million question, right? For many people, lots of practice owners, whether you're in medical field, in accountancy, in legal firms, whatever it is, you've gone into a profession, you haven't gone into a profession as a salesperson. And yet your job is to sell your services, right? Whatever profession you're in. And you said something there, which was really, really important, that heart-centered approach. So oftentimes when we think about ourselves as consumers, we come across salespeople who are maybe, we're buying a car. And so it's the used car salesperson, or, you've invited someone in to give you a quote for a kitchen and they won't leave until they've being given a deposit check or whatever it is, right? The interactions we have as consumers with salespeople puts us off, right? We don't see ourselves as that doesn't take no for an answer, put foot in the door type of salesperson. The majority of us aren't that. But what we are is we're here to serve, and we're here with that heart-centered approach, right? So that whole aspect of, I'm here to help you, and I've got this skill, this capability, this knowledge that will help your health improve, that will help you achieve what you want to achieve. And I'm here to serve you. And if you go in with that sort of mindset, then the selling becomes more of a natural conversation rather than trying to close a deal, because sales, sales training, particularly in the sort of sales 101 is, you've got to build a yes ladder and you've got to do this and you've got to do that. And then
Yeah.
you help handle these objections and those objections, and you've just got to keep on always be closing. And that's not the reality when you're in a professional environment. In a professional environment, you are simply having a conversation. And in that conversation, that person is looking at you and buying your value and recognizing that you've got that skill and capability. So just shift that little subtle shift that I'm not here to sell you, I'm here to serve you. And that little shift makes a big difference in people's mindset around how they go about closing their deals.
Yeah. I think they get really worried when they start to get, well, doc, I just can't afford it. And they won't ask the other follow-up questions like you would if you had a friend, right?
Yeah.
So they won't say, well, I know you say that, but we have financing, we have a lot of things, but what's your plan?
Mm.
They won't even ask them what their plan is. And here in the States, I know that you're primarily in the UK, but you've been all over the world. And here we have a healthcare situation to where it is expensive,
Yeah.
However, it's less expensive now to pay cash pay, even if it's like $3,000 to $7,000, than to, in many cases, pay insurance all the time, because it's just not paying for it. You're still having to pay when you pay for insurance. And so I think it's easier now because people are they're becoming more aware of how limited these institutions are with getting them to a wellness point where they're well. And it seems that these institutions are more keeping them, I hate to say keeping them sick, but keeping them into the institution where they're needed, where they still need pharmaceuticals, where they still need all this stuff. And how do you, in your sales training, help the people who have a hard time when they get a no, they immediately go, okay.
Yeah. So that's a good question, actually, because the no in the sort of selling that I do, which is a corporate business to business sale, is somewhat different to the type of selling you're doing, where it's one-on-one, right? The clinician with the patient. And in the corporate environment, you're dealing with a decision maker, but there's other decision makers involved as well. And you can build a momentum behind the sale that you're making, such that the person who might be objecting to the deal, right? The momentum of everyone else, it kind of brings them along on that journey. And so I suppose the lesson from that is, when you're in a environment where it's you and your patient, and your patient's objecting, saying, well, I'm not sure I can afford that, there is still other aspects to this, right? Because that person has a family, that person has a partner, that person has children, that person has parents, that person is other people are dependent on that person. There's a whole kind of set of hats that person sat in front of you is wearing. And all of those people are invested in making sure that person is healthy and has a good outcome. So part of a kind of a sales pitch could be around all of those people that care for you, all these people that are interested in your health. What would they say, right? What would their recommendation be? What would their advice be to you? And that can be the thing that can make someone stop and say, do you know what? Actually, I should invest in my health, because without your health, you have nothing, right? That's the bottom line. So I appreciate that it's a lot of money. And particularly, even if you have insurance, you may have copay to think about as well, which also then adds to the complexity of it. But at the end of the day, that investment in you, in your health and your well-being, is the most important thing you can do, because without that, you cannot look after your parents, you cannot look after your children, you cannot provide for your partner, you cannot do the things that you want to do. So that, I suppose, is the way that I would potentially approach that sort of situation, is to call upon the people around them that rely on them.
I think that's a really good idea, because people tend to put themselves, above, I mean, put themselves less than others around them. Well, I can't do this because they're going to want to go do this trip, or my son's got to go do this for school and that. But at the end of the day, they want their dad or their mom to be healthy,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
and to
Yeah.
enjoy life and to still be there and not say, oh, I can't get up out of the chair and dance with you at our wedding because I could have taken care of this 5 years ago and I didn't. And now I can barely walk, or, whatever it is.
Yeah, there you go. And you could really stretch this story out, right, in terms of but you want it's being ethical in the way in which you're positioning this as well, because
Well, yeah.
I'm sure there are some people who are not so ethical and will like really create a massive story of, well, if you don't do this, you're going to be bedbound within the next 3 months,
Yeah,
or
no,
that sort
no,
of
we
thing,
don't have those clients,
Exactly.
Sanjay. We only have the good ones who would never do that. No, no,
Exactly.
no. I mean, you have to be ethical and correct in what you're stating to them. But there is a big, just don't go, okay, if they go, you have to at least be a friend and challenge it a little bit. Like, think, if this was my cousin or this was my brother, wouldn't I go, yeah, but this is, like, what's your plan then? If not this, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Like, at least ask that, care about them. I think that we just have to care about people more than even saying that we're following a script, right?
Yeah.
Because when you care about people, you really talk to them, you ask them more questions.
Yeah, exactly, and that goes back to what we said, right? The heart-based leadership around this. That's what it is. I'm caring about you. You know, Jennifer, you've come to me with a problem. I'm caring about you. I want to see that you get better, or we solve the problem that you have. So how can we go about doing that? And if you can't, if you feel you can't afford this, well, what can we do, right? What's the other alternatives? And there's a coaching element to this as well. If you think about, like, when you have a coach, when you have a coach, generally doesn't really give you the answer, but they ask you questions. And in your conversation with the coach, as you're thinking about the questions that are being asked, you come up with the answer. So it can be, as you say, just asking those questions, not with a view that I'm going to close this sale, but actually coaching, right? And actually asking that person, okay, so I get it, what you're saying. Well, what else? What could we do differently? What could you do differently? How can we, manage this? And start that kind of conversation, as you say, as a good friend would do that. If you're sat having a cup of coffee with each other, or over
tea, y'all have tea.
I was going to say tea, but I thought, I'll make more of a coffee reference.
You're sweet. That's nice.
And that's what you do, right? That's what you do with two friends over a cup of tea. You've brewed the kettle, the tea's on, and you have a conversation.
Yeah, you do. So you've had a really incredible journey, and what made you decide to do Success Matters? I mean, you have this really big, corporate job. You're doing a great job. You have your own company. You're doing all this stuff. What made you decide to ask people the question of what success matters to them?
Yeah. So I went through a period of self-discovery, a couple of years ago. I changed roles. I left a client-facing sales role, so I was no longer in the front line of sales, and I joined the learning and careers team in Verizon. And at that point, I suddenly realized that actually, all the last my career in Verizon is over 20 years. I've been in a sales role for over 30 years. It's all been around one thing, which is the sales number. And that sales number is the one thing that was the focus for everything pretty much that I did. And it meant that I was working weekends, and it meant that, even on holiday, I'll be taking my phone with me, my laptop with me. Deals never stopped. That was the thing. And now, stepping out from that, it was like, it was actually a shock to the system. I actually remember saying to my manager, I don't know what to do with myself, because I had this rhythm, this cadence that I was operating. And in that moment of kind of headspace, and I have some coaches as well that, I speak to on a regular basis. Two of them at the same time said, well, we know you from your work environment. We've worked with you. You've got a lot to share. Why don't you start a podcast? And I sort of thought, okay, well, that's not a bad idea, and that's not a bad shout. but what will I say? And I could quickly run out of things to talk about. But at the time, I was also exploring in my own mind, well, how do you know you've got to where you want to get to? How do you know what success is? And so I thought, well, actually, why not ask other people? And in the process, that's how the podcast was formed, and that's where I started. And so, yes, as you said in the introduction, I speak to lots of different people from lots of different walks of life about what success means to them, and we all have a story. We've all been on a journey. That journey could be one of real, complex, difficult upbringing, difficult childhood, or it could be one where the journey has just taken you on this like meandering path, and you've got to a point and you've had this moment where you say, actually, there's something different. There's something else I want in life. So every conversation is different. Every single person has a slightly different perspective, and pretty much none of them say, it's the fast car, it's the fancy house, it's the, lots of foreign holidays. That is never in that conversation.
Isn't that amazing too? Because I think that our media, mostly, media, and if you look in social media, that's the only thing people want to talk about. It is so just materialistic base, even though those same people will say, yes, I'm in this great location and I've got like all the Cartier jewelry on and all that. But, life isn't really about all that. But look at this, and you're like, but it is if you're in social media,
Well, yeah, we just have to remember that
yeah.
that Instagram snap or that little TikTok video or whatever it is, that was in that moment. That's not necessarily them. They could have just stood outside someone else's car or house
and they do.
Exactly. And they say, look at me, look how successful my life is. And that's, as you're right, social media, in media in general, it kind of positions fame and fortune as being that thing of success, right? But actually, I one of my interviews was with a lady called Love Melody, and she herself, she's in Nigeria. She became an orphan at the age of 7. Her grandparents took her in. Grandparents couldn't cope financially. She ended up not quite on the streets, but in an orphanage, and not really able to have the kind of love and care that every child deserves. She started up, now that she's an adult, she's started a little business on the side to keep her ticking over from a bills perspective, but her main focus is actually helping street kids. And so for her, success is, if I can change the trajectory of these 30 street children that I'm supporting, then that is success for her, right? And so, that's just one example of someone for whom that Instagrammable kind of thing is not what success means.
Yeah, but how big is that? One of the things that we ask our clients for Brand Lab when we take on a client is they have to do an identity document. So one of the first things they do is we're trying to find their North Star, their core, the thing that, why are you working this hard? It's an accelerator program. It's hard. We're asking people to sometimes double, even triple their business. That's not easy. It takes a lot of work, a lot of dedication, and a lot of time. And so one of the things that we want to know is like, where is their center? And we ask them to think about their funeral and the legacy. How many people are there? What are they saying about you? What is the biggest legacies you want to leave behind? In a couple of years, where do you want to be doing? How does that tie in? What are you doing now? And how's that tie into that goal that you said you want to leave if anything happened? Right. And a lot of people have thought about it, but very few have actually done the exercise through it. And all of our clients do that exercise. They have to, but they'll say to me, they'll go, I think about this and I've put a lot of thought, but I've never like really written it down. And a lot of writing those things down, I think, is a commitment. Like you're committing to yourself to stay true to your purpose. And I think they're a little bit afraid of that. When you talk to those people, what do they do to stay true to what they feel is success? How do they get that commitment from themselves to invest in themselves and also promise themselves that they'll do what they need to do for their own purpose?
Yeah. So just go back actually to something you said there about the legacy that you leave. because one of my other podcast episodes was with a lady called Dr. Kathy Zhang, and Kathy worked through, she's a palliative care doctor, and she worked through the COVID pandemic. And so she, was witnessing people passing away at a rate that was much higher than she would normally have in her clinics. And so, we all know it. We all know this, that on your deathbed, you're not going to say, I wish I had spent more hours in the office, right? You're going to say, I wish I'd done
Never.
other things. And Kathy's, got that hands-on experience of speaking to people in their last moments or in their dying days, and, having those conversations about what people really, really want to do. And the majority is about the legacy that they've left behind, right? What regrets maybe about some legacies, or actually celebrating what they've put in place for that. So I think that's a really powerful exercise to do, to think about and really actually stop and think about it, not just kind of like randomly think about it, but actually, as you say, write it down on paper. What's the legacy that I want to leave? Because that, as you say, is a commitment to yourself that you will do that. And that's one of the coaching techniques that we have, is you write a little note to yourself. And then also the identity aspect, which you touched on. We all have various identities that we have, but there are some key North Star elements to that, which are based really around your values, your interests, and your purpose. And so if you think about the values, interests, and purpose that you have within your life, that helps to create that North Star, if you like, for your legacy as well. I know you asked a follow-up question. I've kind of forgotten what it is in my answer there.
I think I forgot what it is too. We'll just have to bring you back on for it.
Just carry on.
Yeah, we'll just carry on. So right now, you're taking on coaching clients yourself though, right?
That's right. Yes.
And
yes.
is it more life coaching, or are you mostly focused on sales because that's your background?
Okay. So it's mostly around sales, but not necessarily sales people, if that makes sense.
Oh, okay.
So it's a lot of my work is with business owners, a fair bit with startups, and it's really helping them on that journey around, okay, well, you've got this thing you want to do. We put it in the context of business, because in my background prior to these roles that I've had in corporate, so I ran some small businesses. So I've been there. I've been at the coalface where you're thinking, how am I going to get the cash to pay this next bill that I know is coming in? Or, I've got this invoice that's outstanding, and how am I going to get that money in? Or what do I write that off? And what about, in the case of what we were doing, was we were manufacturing things. So then we had things like the returns policies and all of those things. So there was a huge set of moving parts that you had to manage. So I bring all of that knowledge. I bring the corporate world knowledge, and then I bring my own kind of experiences to bear to help people. And so that's the sort of coaching that I do. Some of it is life coaching, but it's primarily on the basis of you've got an idea for your business. Either it's a startup or you're already established in business and you want to do something different. How can you achieve that, and what can you do?
Yeah, because I got to tell you, when you were talking about that, I own my own businesses, and when you're first starting out, fear, that financial fear in bills, that can really impact sales more than you think. People are very savvy, and they can smell desperation. So even if you have something that they're just gagging for, they really, really want, if they feel like you're desperate to give it to them in any way, shape, or form, they have a protective mechanism. We all have this innate thing. And I think people are more savvy than they used to be too. They'll be like, let me just think about it. You're freaking me out a little bit. And so you have to break through that to be the real consultative person and actually divorce yourself from that fear in whatever way you have to do. So when you talked about that, I went, oh, I remember that well, and having to work through that.
I mean, that applies going back to the sales, roles, as it were. Even if you're in a corporate job, in the sales role, you've got targets to hit, KPIs to hit, and ultimately in a sales position, if you aren't making your number, you could be out. So that desperation still comes through in many sales conversations, and people can spot it, as you say. People can spot that fear almost. So when you're in your own little business and you're thinking, okay, I've got, $10,000 worth of bills coming in tomorrow and I can't see where my next kind of dollar is coming from. That can affect the way in which you're selling. You project that desperation. There's a whole set of things there, and you've got to really pull yourself back from that and say, do you know what? I'm trusting my process. I've got a process in place. I'm going to trust it. And yes, there will be these moments of cash flow, but as the cash comes in, I'll also bank some of that cash so that I know that when I've got those other bills coming in, I've got a slightly quieter period. I've got enough to cover that. And then, so once you put those processes and systems in place and you trust them, then it becomes a lot easier.
Yeah, learning to trust and to have the systems in place. That's an
Yes.
important thing to be able to do. So
Mm.
going back to asking people what does success matter to them, is there in I know it's completely different for all people, but are there any general themes that you've picked on that you say this one thing seems to be very popular? What would you
Mm.
say it is?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I'm actually going through that exercise now. I've
Oh,
published 51 episodes of Success Matters.
that's a
And,
lot.
and yeah, thank you. Every question, every time I ask my guest, so what does success mean to you? I do get a slightly different answer. I would say happiness comes quite high in the list.
Mhm.
Happiness and then okay, so how do you measure that happiness? What is that happiness index
Mhm.
for you? And that's really related to having freedom to do what you want to do is one aspect of that. Having the confidence in yourself to know that you've got everything inside you that you need to be able to live the life that you want. And we all do. We just put these barriers up that actually stop us from achieving what we want to achieve. And there's sort of third thing, which is around, I would say service is the third thing that comes up quite a lot, whether it's, the example I gave of love, whether it's Kathy, who's the palliative care doctor, whether it's Laura, who's a good friend of mine who had one view of what success meant for her. She had two children who are both autistic, one very severely autistic. For her now, it's creating a world that she knows her children will be able to grow up into adults that supports them, right? And so in doing so, she's actually serving the whole, if you like, community of people who have a similar situation. So I suppose those are the three things that come up as general themes.
Yeah, those are really good. And I'm glad I know that because for me, working, with the clinic owners like I do, those are other themes that I can pull out
Mm.
too. You have to remind yourself because we get stuck in the day to day so quickly. Well, I've got to make this phone call and I've got
Yeah.
these 10 emails and I've got this stuff. And then sometimes it's hard when you do your, like every night I do my prayers before I go to bed, but then I also take a reflection of the day. Like, did I hit my priorities for the day? What do I need to do for tomorrow? Those sorts of thoughts. And there have been days where I've like, I don't even know what happened. Like it just this day happened. I'm not really sure what that was all about, but I'm gonna
Yeah.
try tomorrow. And it feels like if we can be more intentional with what success matters to us, and if we're on the beat of it, we can be happier, which is one of the
Hmm.
things people want in general. So yeah.
Yeah. And that goes back to the deathbed exercise that you ask people to do, right? Because that's, if you reflect each day on how have I got further closer to my goal, my aspiration, that North Star of mine, then that really does help to drive, your happiness, I suppose, right? Because every day you will make a change. You will make it. You may not feel like a big step, but what I've noticed as well with my own podcast is I started it 2 years ago. I myself have come on a journey. So if I stop and look back to my very first episode to now, that in itself, there's been quite a transformation. But then when I look at my guests who've been on the podcast with me and they've gone through a transformation too. So, when we had a conversation 2 years ago to where they are now, there's been quite a massive shift. And one of them, I haven't recorded this as a podcast, but you mentioned that I'm an advisor. I'm an advisor to a foundation called Blue Bike Foundation,
Mhm.
which in itself set up 2 years ago. And when we look at where the founder was of that foundation and what she wanted to do, she to where she is now today, right? So as the founder, she was very focused on, I want to do this. I'm doing this. for a purpose, which is to help children. That's really the primary focus of Blue Bike Foundation. And she was stuck in the weeds of all of the getting the statute in place and getting all the kind of structures in place. Now I speak to her, and she really and truly is the CEO of that organization. She really and truly is behaving as the CEO, looking at building the network, bringing people on board, getting the funds in, building the team around her. So that transformation in 2 years has been pretty vast. But if she stopped, if she didn't stop and think about that, she might think she's not making progress. And I think your clients will probably have a similar situation, that they may not stop to think. And so that daily reflection, just that, oftentimes people talk about journaling, and, just write 3 good things that happened to you on that day, or 3 things that happened to you that were towards your goal. And very quickly you'll start to build this momentum and this history of, actually, I am making progress. It may not have felt like it, but I am actually making progress.
Yes. Well, we are already at time. I could still talk to you forever. The only one thing I do want to ask, so for those of you who are listening, he has a fascinating painting behind him. And that painting is a gradient from a very dark blue to a very brilliant, almost red-orange at the bottom. And in the middle of the painting is a triangular cloud. And it is the triangle is pointed downwards, almost like a boat. And then there's someone riding the cloud, like a little boy, and he's got the sails up and the little thing. So I wanted to ask you about that painting, because I've been looking at it going, I really love that painting. And hardly my eye is drawn to a lot of things. So is there a story about that before we wrap it up?
There is indeed, yes. So that painting was painted for me by my son's girlfriend, Patty, who is an artist. And the story behind this painting is that I wanted something for my wall. And so I was talking to them both, and she offered to pay me a painting. So a few months passed, and she came back to me and said, I'm thinking about the painting, and is there a particular saying that really kind of stands out for you? And I'd read a book. Well, I'd listened to a podcast, and then I bought the book to read it, by a guy called Gay Hendricks, and the book is called Conscious Luck. And within that book, they have a saying, and I'm going to paraphrase here from a Stanford professor, who says that luck is not like a lightning bolt. It's actually around us like the wind. You just have to make the sails to catch it. And so that is what this painting is about. That on the cloud, that boy on the cloud is actually me sailing this boat, catching the wind, and the wind of luck, right? The luck is all around us. I've made the sails to catch the wind, and we're heading in whatever direction that luck is taking us.
I love it. And what a wonderful way to end this episode. So again, guys, we've been speaking with Sanjai Mehta of Success Matters, and you can find him on his YouTube channel. He's on Spotify. He's on Apple Podcasts. And also too, if you go to superclinicproject.com, then you can go down to the bottom, get into our school. That's SKOOL, that platform we have. You can get in there for free. I have the link for you, and we will have all of his information and this podcast there. You can also find us on anywhere, any platform a podcast can be found on, SuperClinic can be found on. But anyway, I really want to thank you, Sanjai, for being here today. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I hope we have many more in the future.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting me. And it's, our time has passed very quickly. So it's been a great conversation.
It did. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Super Clinic Project podcast. If you like what you hear, subscribe and stay tuned for further episodes of the Super Clinic Project podcast.